This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Adam Kaplan and Geoff Mosher's in the house today. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Talked to Mosher, a little football. You know, earlier today I was on Birds 365 with McMullen and Jody Mack, and we were talking about some of the, off-season things between now and then. The Eagles have typically, over the years, made some late-season moves. Is there anything that they still have up their sleeve that they can do, and where are those spots that possibly they can add some talent? We'll dive into some of that. The running back room, it's something that Nick Sirianni talked about. When you look at the running back room for the Philadelphia Eagles, it's an area that's going to have a completely new look this year. Well, I don't want to say completely new look, but you got two new faces in Swift and, of course, Rashad Penny. You get those two guys in the running back room, how that changes. We talked a little bit about that with Moshe on Monday. The other thing is at wide receiver, Omitis Zaccheaus, you look at that situation with him and Quez Watkins. Could the Eagles potentially add another wide receiver to the wide receiver room? Dan Arnold brought in to play tight end. Is he going to be a factor in that tight end room? And then, of course, the big story, I don't say the big story, this isn't like Channel 6 Action News here when we're talking about right guard. But I think that right guard spot, we got a little clue. And I talked about this morning in that Cam Jurgens, right? Many people thought that he may be the guy that gets that left guard spot or that right guard spot. But as Mosher talked about earlier this week, Jurgens was taking snaps at center. So, does that necessarily mean that the Eagles value him more as the backup or the second center, or do they want him to win that right guard spot? So we talked about that with Adam yesterday, and one of the things, Geoff Mosher, that Adam Kaplan, your colleague over at InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast said, is that he thought that Tyler Steen for them is the heavy favorite to win that right guard spot. That's the guy that they want to win that job. And I thought that was kind of interesting because we kind of think that this is going to be a wide open battle. And then when you mentioned the other day, that Jurgens got the snaps at center, I thought to myself, well, if you want to have this guy be in play for that spot, do you want him? Because, and I phrase it like this, Moshe, we know when there's an injury on the Eagles offensive line, they don't generally like to move two players. They only like, what I'm saying? So if, let's say, Kelsey got hurt, they don't want to move Jurgens from right guard to center and then have to put a new guard in because that's two new pieces. So does that insight, does that give us a little clue at maybe the way the Eagles are thinking about that right guard spot?
Yeah, I think it folds into all of the reasons that they would want Tyler Steen to win that job, why they drafted him in the third round, knowing that he had short arms and probably projected to guard. Certainly the best player, Mike, I think at the end of the day will win. But I would say Cam Jurgens has to have clearly proved that he is a better right guard for the offensive line, for now, for the a year from now, whatever, that for them to believe that he would be the best candidate. He has to outplay Tyler Steen. And that's going to be a little bit difficult, I think, because they already kind of view him as a center and the heir apparent to Jason Kelsey, and B, he's not as big of a guy as Tyler Steen is, and he's only played offensive line for 2 years as opposed to Steen, who's always been an offensive lineman. So I don't want to say the cards are stacked against him. He had looked good last year in playing center, right? So if you can look good at playing center, you can probably look good in playing guard. But again, you have to take the whole line into account. And if you have an undersized center in Jason Kelsey, and that's a position where you're doing a lot of combo blocking, and then you leave your combo block to block somebody else, well, you got to leave that somebody else to someone who can hold up. And I would think that they believe Tyler Steen is more equipped to hold up on a big guy like, say, Dexter Lawrence, right, of the Giants, than Cam Jurgens.
Yeah, I agree there. And, Jurgens getting those reps as the center when Kelsey was out the other day, I don't know if that kind of foreshadows or gives us any clues there, but we all know that he would be the backup center and he's the heir apparent at that spot. So it looks like, as Adam said yesterday, that Steen would be the favorite to win that spot there. I want to talk a little bit between now And when training camp starts, we know this team has been known to kind of add some pieces and do some things. Are there any of the glaring spots that you still think that Howie would do something between now and training camp, or do you think they will be radio silent between now and when camp kicks off?
It's a good point. I think they have a glaring need, a glaring area of concern at linebacker, but I'm not sure that they would do anything there as far as street free agent signing, Mike, before training camp. I think that's an area that they could address during or right after cut downs. But, they did kick the tires on DJ Fluker recently. And you're always looking for offensive linemen who can come in and especially veteran offensive linemen. The Eagles like to have veteran offensive line depth. They do have Fred Johnson, and they have somebody else whose name's escaping me right now, as veteran. But the fact that they were kicking the tires on DJ Fluker makes me think that between now and training camp, it wouldn't surprise me if they signed a veteran offensive lineman.
We talked about this. I was with Jody and John this morning. It was an interesting question, and I'll see if your answer matches mine. Jody asked me, crystal ball, who are the Eagles' starting linebackers in week number 1? I just want to hear what your answer is before I give you mine.
Yeah, it's really funny because somebody else asked me this today in an interview, and I said, we talked about how, for whatever reason with the Eagles a couple times the last few years, the starting linebackers that started week 1 were not the best linebackers on the team and weren't the starting linebackers by week 6, 7, or even later. So if we're going by history, I kind of get the lean that the starting linebackers will be Nakobe Dean and Nick Morrow. But let's see how Christian Ellis does. Let's see how he competes. Let's see if he can prove himself and make it so that it's a decision for the coaches. But even if he does that, if you go back, I think 2 years ago, I think after OTAs and training camp, it was pretty clear that TJ Edwards was playing pretty well, and it really started developing. And yet they had signed Eric Wilson. He was more of a veteran. He had played in the league. And, of course, Eric Wilson got the start alongside Alex Singleton. But the defense wasn't very good, especially against the run, and it wasn't long before T.J. Edwards got in there, you guys remember. And when T.J. Edwards started to play, it was almost like, what took you so long to get this guy in here? He was clearly an upgrade. So I would almost answer that by saying it almost doesn't matter who starts week 1. Whatever the best combination is, you hope that the Eagles figure that out sooner than later, and not after it cost them a few games.
Yeah. My answer was it was Nakobe Dean and somebody who's not here. How probable do you think someone who's not here is the answer to the question?
I think they're I don't know, 40% chance. It kind of depends on who's out there after cut downs and how familiar they are with the system. And then, are the Eagles happy or not happy with what they saw from the Morrow-Ellis-Dean combination? So it's kind of hard right now, but I certainly think it'll be an area that they look at based on what they see from their linebacking core in training camp.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you take a look at, we go through a lot of this roster and where this roster is. As we are at this stage of the summer, is this roster for you entering camp a more complete, better roster than the roster they had last year, or do you like the team where they were last year ahead of this one?
Oh, heck no. I don't know how you can listen, I think the Eagles are going to be good, but I don't know how you can look at the defense this year and, have the same expectations last year after losing, a guy like T.J. Edwards, a guy like Javon Hargrave, a guy like C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Epps, and replacing them with guys who, again, I get that, T.J. and T.J. Edwards and Marcus Epps were also sort of in that boat a year or two ago and really stepped into big roles and became prominent. But I don't know that you can guarantee that for the same things for Nick Morrow, Christian Ellis, Sidney Brown as a rookie, even Terrell Edmonds, who's been a good player, but nothing like C.J. Gardner-Johnson has. I just think you have a whole lot more uncertainty up the middle of your defense.
Yeah, and I asked that question based on, I was reading the other day, ESPN.com ranked the rosters, the 32 rosters, and they have the Eagles roster ranked as the third best roster in football, and I'm imagining at this time last year, it was not seen the same way.
Right. And that's just comparing the Eagles to other teams not last year's team, which was maybe their best. Even though they didn't win the Super Bowl, it's very, very possible that could have been the best roster in team history. So it's still a good enough team. I mean, I think you can take the Eagles, the 49ers, and I'm going to get slack for this, but Dallas Cowboys, put them in a blender, right? Pick a team after you turn the blender on, and if the paper isn't too shredded, read it and say, yeah, that team can very well represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And there are some other, the Lions are on the come up. We know about them, and we'll see about Seattle. But I think those, from a 53-man standpoint, are the three best 53s in the NFC.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because when we looked at the Major League Baseball season in back in March, I said, hey, the 6 teams in the National League that made the playoffs last year, they look like the clear teams to get back. Well, 4 of those teams are not in the playoffs right now, one of which is the Cardinals. They're the worst team in the National League. So I wonder which team do we think is going to be pretty good? Would you be the least surprised if they kind of fell flat on their face?
I guess the Lions, just based on history, based on, they had a nice rally to end the year last year and finish really strong. But at the end of the day, superstar talent, not a quarterback. They have Jared Goff, who's, been good, and he's been to a Super Bowl. I'm not knocking him. I'm just saying he doesn't. Right. I don't know that he checks that box of, reliable superstar quarterback. So that'll hold you back a little bit. And their defense really, needed a whole half of a year to figure itself out last year before coming on at the end. So that would be a team that, if it didn't get better than 500, if it fell out of the playoff picture, wouldn't surprise me. I'd have a hard time believing the Eagles, 49ers, and Cowboys won't be there. But, hey, you never know.
Yep. Oh, listen, we say those 3 seem like they're at the top. I agree with you. I put the 3 of them. I think Dallas has gotten better. I kind of like what they've done in the offseason and like what they did in the draft. So I think today, as we're kind of sitting in this limbo period, when I'm looking through, 88 days until kickoff, those 88 days start to fly, training camp July 25th. I look at those 3 teams at the top as well. The big question mark, I guess, is San Francisco at quarterback, but I guess Purdy's going to be ready to go.
That sounds like it. And, I don't know how many times we say the big question mark for them going into the year as quarterback, and yet what have they made, like 4 of the last 5 NFC Championship games?
True. Absolutely. What is your take, Geoff Mosher, on what's happening with the Giants and the Saquon Barkley situation? Kind of read some tea leaves on how all of that is happening right now.
Yeah, Saquon Barkley's a pretty good dude. I don't know him personally or anything like that, but he's always carried himself in a pretty dignified manner. And I just, from reading it from the outside, I feel like maybe he's not real happy with that. Reports are sort of painting him as turning down money that's funny. They always say, oh, well, you turned down this amount of money, and then you go see a contract and you realize, well, it's not really that average. It's that average per year, but a lot of that money is not guaranteed, so you can't really count it. But at the end of the day, he really doesn't have much leverage. There are really, really steep fines for holding out of mandatory camps. I mean, he could do it. He's still wealthy enough to handle it, but if you do that, you might as well just be prepared to hold out the entire year, like a Le'Veon Bell. And I don't know how many people are going to wind up going down the Le'Veon Bell route. I don't know how many people are going to look at that.
Well, he did say Monday, that's a card I could play, and you're right. Would he do that? And I guess the follow-up to that is, look, that's a team last year that made the playoffs. Barkley had, 1,300 yards. If they lost Barkley, what kind of team are the Giants?
Well, I did a little bit of a deep dive, though, on them last year, and Barkley averaged over 100 rushing yards per game and over 120 total yards per game in their first 9 games, and they got off to a 7-2 start. They were the surprise team. But as that season went on, and including the playoffs, you can correct me, double check me. I think he only carried the ball 9 times in both of their playoff games, including a win against Minnesota. They started to phase away from being like the run first attack. They were starting to open it up a little bit more with Daniel Jones. And I imagine that they're going to want to do that. They acquired Darren Waller. They drafted Jalen Hyatt. They hope Sterling Shepard is coming back. Wandale Robinson, who they drafted in the second round, who they love, is coming back from a knee injury, and we'll see where he goes. So they're bringing in passing weapons, right? You know, Mike Kafka comes from the Andy Reid tree. You know, Brian Dable came from Buffalo. They want to throw the ball around. I think that they would say, all right, Saquon, you know, you were very important to us for the first half of last year, but for where we're going, if you want to sit out the entire year and risk that, then you go for it. I think we're going to still be all right without you. Yeah. We'll be better with you, no doubt about it. But we got to kind of learn to be not just completely driven by a running back to begin with. Yeah. So I would say the Giants would be the ones to call Saquon's bluff on his statement there.
He did have 9 carries in the 2 playoff games, 9 against Minnesota, 9 against Philadelphia. And you wonder if he sits out, do they go down the Dalvin Cook road and just say, you know what, we'll get another guy. You don't want to sign that deal, we'll go get somebody else. Thanks for playing.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the difficulties that running backs face these days, is that no matter how good they are, their position is seen as fungible and not difficult to replace. Even if you're not getting equal caliber, sometimes you're just looking for somebody to get you enough yards on first and second down. I mean, the Vikings are literally saying, Dalvin Cook's been great for us. We're all right with Alexander Madison and some other people, because what we're all about right now is Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and KJ Osborne, or whoever it is, and maybe Jalen Reagor is still part of their plans. And then they drafted Zay Flowers, didn't they? Or Jordan Addison, one of those 2 guys?
Yeah, the Minnesota. And by the way, there is some talk about maybe bringing him back at a lesser number is a possibility for them as well. So keep an eye on that. Because, you got
same thing with Dallas and Zeke, right? I mean, Zeke is just still out there, and there's been that talk too.
Yep. And also the other thing I wanted to, on the Giants front, is they added Waller. And do you think getting Waller kind of expands that offense enough to take them to another level?
It could, Mike. I mean, he really has to stay healthy. And, it seems like he's about 2 years removed from having a great year, right, for his last great year. He's certainly better than anything the Giants have at that position to begin with, so that should improve him. We'll see if he still has vertical ability left after some of the injuries that he's been through. But at very least, he gives you a pretty good, again, when healthy, gives you a nice target over the middle. And if he's good again and commanding some attention and can give you some good 15 to 20-yard range production, and that draws, the defense's respect, and that enables you now to open it up to Jalen Hyatt or Darius Slayton, get the ball down the field a little bit to those guys. Well, yeah, that's obviously what they had in mind. I mean, I think this Giants team, that's another team that kind of falls into the category, Mike, of maybe if they took a step back from last year, it wouldn't shock me, because, they were coming from nothing and they had a nice little run, but they're still got a far way to go. But I definitely applaud their process and what they've done to try to get better on the offensive line and in their weaponry.
Good stuff. Geoff Mosher, we're taking a look at the NFC East throughout this summer. We'll look at all the teams in the NFC East. Washington, by the way, I think one of the things we forget about Washington, and we could dive into this a little bit later in more in-depth next time around, but Eric Bieniemy's there now and how he's going to impact that team. There's been a lot of reports out of Washington, players being held a lot more accountable there, and that things are noticeably different on the practice field this time around.
Well, someone being held accountable in Washington would be definitely a first, right?
Right, first. Geoff Mosher, everybody, from Inside the Birds podcast at InsideTheBirds.com here on another edition of Football at 4 on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Mosher, thanks, buddy.
Take care, Mike.
And there's Geoff Mosher here on the Sports Bash live as we talk some more football on, of course, Football at 4. Tomorrow, Andrew DeCecco is in the house.